January 15, 1919. A 25-foot wave of molasses tore through downtown Boston at 35 miles per hour. It crushed buildings, ripped a train off its tracks, and killed 21 people. Horses drowned in it. Rescuers couldn't run through it. And the worst part? The tank had been leaking for years. People collected the drips in cups. The company's solution? Paint it brown so no one could see the leaks. This is the story of one of the strangest and deadliest industrial disasters in American history. To understand why Boston had a giant tank of molasses in the first place, you need to know what was about to happen in America. Prohibition was coming. The manufacture and sale of alcohol was about to become illegal, and companies were scrambling to produce as much industrial alcohol as they could before the law took effect. The Purity Distilling Company, despite its name, wasn't making anything pure. They were turning molasses into industrial alcohol used in weapons manufacturing during World War I. So in 1915, they built a massive steel storage tank in Boston's North End, more than 50 feet tall, 90 feet wide, capable of holding 2.3 million gallons. It went up in just 4 months, no proper testing, no structural review, and almost immediately it started to leak. Locals said children would run underneath with cups and scoop up the sweet, sticky drips. Instead of fixing the problem, the company just painted the tank brown, so you couldn't see the molasses streaking down the sides. By early January 1919, the tank was nearly full. Inside, more than 2 million gallons of thick, dark molasses, and it was fermenting. The weather in Boston had been brutally cold for weeks. Then suddenly, the temperature spiked. Warm air outside, fermenting liquid inside. The molasses expanded. Pressure built. Witnesses later reported hearing strange sounds from the tank, deep groans like metal under stress. One worker described it as sounding like a dying animal. The rivets holding the steel plates together were barely holding. On the morning of January 15th, people near the tank heard sharp cracking sounds, like gunfire. The rivets were popping out, one by one. The company did nothing. At 12:30 p.m., office workers nearby were returning from lunch. Patrolman Frank McManus had just walked past the tank and was about 100 feet away. Freight workers were eating at their desks. The elevated train rumbled overhead, like it always did. And then, the tank gave up. At 12:40 p.m., the tank exploded. Some people heard a deep rumble. Others thought it was the elevated train. Then they felt the ground shake. Joseph Hiller, returning from lunch, saw the entire side of the tank rip open. He later told reporters, "The big tank opened out and fell apart, and a wall of molasses, 50 feet high, rolled out over the ground with a seething, hissing sound." The first wave was as tall as a 2-story building, moving at 35 miles per hour. Robert Burnett was eating dinner with his family when he saw it coming. "There was no roar or explosion," he said, "just a rumble. Then I heard a swish like wind rushing. It became dark. I looked out the window and saw this great black wave. It didn't rush, it just rolled slowly, like the side of a mountain falling into space. The wave hit homes, warehouses, and a nearby fire station with enough force to rip buildings off their foundations. The elevated train trestle buckled and collapsed. 3 houses were crushed instantly. Horses, wagons, and people were swept away in seconds. Patrolman McManus felt something wet hit his back and shoulders. "I thought it might be mud," he said, "but when I turned, I saw the molasses tank plunge toward the elevated structure. The next second, a wave swept up the street in my direction. But I beat it in a race." He ran. Not everyone did. In a jar, molasses moves slowly. At this scale, it acted like a flash flood, violent, unstoppable. But then, as quickly as it rushed in, it began to thicken. And that's when the real horror started. People who survived the initial wave found themselves trapped, waist deep, chest deep, in syrup that pulled at them like quicksand. Martin Clawford had been asleep on the third floor of his home when the wave hit. The force ripped his house off its foundation and smashed it against the elevated tracks. He woke up submerged. "I thought I was overboard," he said. "I didn't realize it was molasses." His mother, Bridget, was crushed in the wreckage. His brother, rescued from the debris, later died in an asylum from the trauma. Rescuers couldn't run. Every step was a struggle. The molasses clung to boots, tools, ropes, everything. Horses panicked, sank, and suffocated. The cold January air started hardening the molasses into something closer to wet concrete. Screams echoed through the streets, but reaching the people making them was nearly impossible. One reporter wrote, "The shouts and screams of the dying and injured rent the air. For the first quarter of an hour, pandemonium reigned." By 1 o'clock, just 20 minutes after the explosion, rescue crews had pulled more than 100 people from the wreckage. But many were still trapped, and the molasses kept hardening. When the wave finally stopped, it left behind a frozen wasteland. 21 people were dead, more than 150 injured. Entire blocks were coated in molasses up to 2 feet deep. Buildings had to be demolished just to reach the bodies trapped inside. The smell was overwhelming, sweet, sickly, mixed with smoke and oil from the harbor. For days, rescue workers labored around the clock, cutting through wreckage and hardened syrup. The molasses stuck to everything: boots, uniforms, tools, skin. It was tracked through the rest of Boston by boots, hooves, and eventually car tires. The harbor turned brown. Crews had to pump salt water into the streets just to thin the molasses enough to shovel it. Even then, it took weeks to clear. Telephone operators reported their switchboards were jammed with calls. The molasses had seeped into the equipment. Shop owners found it creeping under their doors, ruining inventory. One sailor described the cleanup as walking through hell, but hell smelled like candy. And years later, decades later, residents of the North End swore parts of the neighborhood still shimmered a strange brown in the sunlight. Some said they could still smell it on the hottest days. Almost immediately, the company that owned the tank tried to shift the blame. They claimed anarchists had bombed the structure, part of a coordinated attack. It was a lie. Investigations revealed the same truth. The steel was too thin, half as thick as it should have been. The design was flawed. The tank was never stress tested. Rivets were installed improperly. Some were missing altogether. An engineer later testified that the tank would have failed, even if it had only been half full. The company knew it leaked. They'd received complaints for years. Their response? Paint. The legal battle lasted years, but eventually, the company was found responsible. They paid out the equivalent of millions in today's money to victims' families. But no one ever faced criminal charges. No executives. No engineers. The company folded quietly, and most of its records disappeared. But the disaster didn't disappear. The lawsuits that followed pushed cities across the country toward stricter building codes, mandatory safety testing, and real engineering oversight. People stopped assuming good enough was safe. Today, Boston's North End is one of the busiest parts of the city. Tourists walk those streets every day, taking photos, eating Italian food, completely unaware they're standing where a wave of molasses once tore through the neighborhood. There's a small plaque now, near where the tank stood. Most people walk right past it. But on the hottest summer days, some locals still say they catch something faint in the air, something sweet. Old-timers insist it's the molasses, still seeping up from the cracks in the pavement. Scientists say that's impossible. But the smell, real or not, is a reminder. A reminder that 21 people died because a company chose paint over safety. A reminder that good enough killed. A reminder that some disasters don't just disappear. They soak into the ground, into the memory of a place, and linger long after the wreckage is cleared. The Great Molasses Flood started with a leak, and Boston has never fully washed it away.